talked last week, I believe it was, about White Lotus. It actually ended up getting this channel almost in trouble as we made a thumbnail that just ended up being it flew a little too close to the sun with the language, and the video just literally sat in queue and YouTube wouldn't upload it. Well, White Lotus is back in the news because star Carrie Coon says that her White Lotus character was written to have a non-binary child, but the scene was cut after Trump's election. I thought the after part was the most interesting thing because, well, let's go through it first, and then we'll save our opinions for the end. So let's go through this article. It says, the White Lotus has gotten political during season 3 with one viral scene featuring Kate declining to say whether she voted for Donald Trump or not, shocking her friends Jacqueline and Lori. But the interaction originally had a more loaded political context, shares Carrie Coon. She plays Lori in the show. The star recently told Harper's Bazaar that a detail about her character's personal life was cut after the election. The season was written and filmed before Trump was reelected president. This is her quote. Oh, wow. You originally found out that her daughter was actually non-binary, maybe trans, and going by they, them pronouns, Kuhn said. You see Lori struggling to explain it to her friends, struggling to use they, them pronouns, struggling with language, which was all very interesting. I actually don't find that interesting. I find that really annoying, and it's actually the last thing I would want to see in entertainment.
And I know we're going to get dissect this article, but I last time I was on, it was either last week or the week before, I asked Mary, I was like, what's the deal with this White Lotus show? And I thought it was new. This thing has 3 seasons, and so like with scenes like
they're
this,
anthologies, so each season is different characters.
Oh, okay. So this season must just be super buzzworthy, I guess. Yeah. Okay.
The first, it's about the White Lotus Resort, and NIMBY people who go to the White Lotus Resort and all their interactions there.
But when I read what this scene was about, like politics aside, I'm like, who is this for? Like, this doesn't really sound like.
Well, the thing I thought
must-see TV.
I thought was most interesting about it is actually indicative of what people find frustrating about all this, which is that they talk about, actually, you know what? We'll go into a little bit more detail because they talk about the process of cutting it out and why they decided not to include it. So let's give it some context here. It says the season was written before the election, and considering the way the Trump administration has weaponized the cultural war against transgender people ever since then, even more since then, when the time came to cut the episode down, Mike felt like the scene was so small and the topic so big that it wasn't the right way to engage in the conversation. Okay, so that's what I thought was interesting. So the reason most people find this stuff annoying is they're actually talking about stuff that is like the most basic aspect of human communication, which is like being able to address someone properly. And the problem is we've taken issues like biological sex and the manner in which you refer to someone by their gender or their identity, and we've turned them into issues that are so big that they can't just be throwaway lines in anything. They have to dominate the entire discussion, which actually kind of says to me that they don't understand how grating that is on the average person.
Right. Well, it's also
like people who don't have any ill will towards anyone, people who don't have any hate in their heart, just don't like the idea of being led down a path where they have to kind of adhere to a conversation, and if they get it wrong, it's somehow a bad thing.
Well, it's a it's like you're saying, it goes completely opposite of how normal interaction goes in people's daily lives, but it's a massive distraction. I think you've made this point many a times, especially on IRL, where like the slightest hint of like something being PC or even just political in general, and it completely takes you out of that viewing experience. Like with there was one I can't remember it, over the summer that this happened. I forget what project it was, and it's just like you can't enjoy something when they make it overtly. Family Guy was doing this. They're doing this, and I was watching the season that came out in around 2020, 2021, and everything was just like a dig at politics. And it's like, oh my God, I get it, you know?
Do you think that it's actually more interesting? Like, first of all, I thought it was interesting that they got rid of it at all. Normally what they talk about here is how Hollywood wants to speak truth to power. Right. So what they're actually admitting to here is that they backed down from the conversation, and that kind of fell in line with the way people reacted on X, which is people who wanted them to have this discussion are now mad at them because they wouldn't have the discussion and they feel like they're backing down to the powers that be.
But we talk about how internet is just like, it's not real life. And that is true to an extent. Yeah. But like when you see like, there's a difference between the internet actually echoing what regular people feel. And then there's people that are just like the ones that go on Yelp because a waiter pissed them off at a restaurant, right?
Yeah.
The crybabies, the people that throw temper tantrums are always going to be screaming the loudest. And so I don't know if it's the best, gauge.
Well, here's a comment.
On if people actually wanted to, this in their show.
Yeah. So here's a comment. This person says, do people realize this is actually giving into the fear because you're submitting to the establishment? You're doing exactly what they wanted. This is what the white man can't comprehend, that taking a stand is taking a stand. That's not really the same thing at the corporate level. These are shows that cost millions upon millions of dollars to make. And one of the things I find most annoying about all of it is the actors and the actresses and the writers and the directors who get up on their soapbox and talk about how they're changing the world with stuff like this. And it's not really changing the world, but that's just my personal opinion. I don't see that as the case. I also wonder how a Kamala presidency would have changed this.
I think that's a cop-out answer.
I mean, but we're seeing, okay, so what we're doing right now is we're seeing the height of the vibe shift, as they call it. Me and Mary make fun of it, about the vibe shift that's currently going on, which I take as Hollywood realizing what doesn't work and using Trump's presidency as an excuse to cut a bunch of stuff that isn't working without making them the bad guy. They get to pass the blame off onto him and his administration because of his repealing of DEI policies.
That might be true, but you also have to ask yourself, who's this audience for the show in general? Like, if it's this raunchy NSFW kind of dating show, I've never seen it, so I don't really know. But from what you guys were talking about last week with why it made waves with a certain scene in the show, this doesn't seem like the audience, like, it's a cop-out answer to me. Blaming Trump, like, your audience.
People are calling the director a coward in this for not including it in there. But then again, if he had left it in there, then it'd say, why didn't you spend more time on it?
I don't even think this is a Trump, a Trump Kamala or a Republican Democrat issue. I think this is like what Tim talks about, like an 80-20 issue, probably 95-5, if not even greater than that most people they cannot relate to this. People want to relate in some way when they watch TV, right? When you watch Spider-Man, we want to be Spider-Man saving Mary Jane. When women watch these dating shows, they want to be on a tropical island with lots of hot people,
Well, we'll talk more about, not Spider-Man specifically, but that type of theme in the next topic.
People aren't having these conversations about pronouns with their children.
Here is she gives more information about the writer of the show and about how his father was very influential. It says Carrie Coon said that that White's handling his characters with nuance, that they're not just one thing. Quote, his father wrote a very influential book about what it was like to come out as a gay man himself in the evangelical church as an adult, which a lot of young men have read and was a very meaningful text for them in their own journeys. So Mike doesn't shy away from challenging cultural conversations, and I really appreciate that about his work. Now, I will give them this, that White Lotus is probably probably better off doing these types of discussions than, say, the big budget movies, which only have 2 hours to 2.5 hours to fill their story, and they have to get to the point and tell a universal themed story that everyone can enjoy. I often make the argument that if you're going to do this type of storytelling, it isn't for me, but television is the place to do it, because when you put these for the big screen, there isn't enough time, there isn't enough impetus to put it there where the return on investment is going to count.
I'd agree. I'd agree if this was like an abortion scene.
Well,
this
then
is just such a, like, nuance is not even the right word. This is not a scene that a majority of people can relate to. So when wherever you put it, it's going to feel like you're forcing it.
Also, let's face it.
I don't think this has anything to do with Trump winning.
Studios, no, the thing. So I think that Trump winning gave these studios an excuse to start giving notes to get rid of this stuff because they want to fall in line with the administration. But it's not because they want to fall in line with the administration. It's that they always knew that this stuff didn't sell as well as they thought it did. And this just gives them their out without taking responsibility for it. They get to shift the blame off on his second term.
What was the company that doubled down? One of the media companies on DEI.
Disney did.
Was it Netflix?
Netflix was never going away from it, but recently
someone
Disney
made a very public announcement.
So recently, I think you're talking about Netflix.
Okay.
But recently, what happened is Disney itself had a proposition put before shareholders about getting rid of this, about going away from this this index that they use to gauge how positive they are toward LGBTQIA plus groups in their company. And given Trump's return to office, a lot of people said that they should stop using these kind of, I guess the word would be quota-based metrics on how they gauge their company. I forget the name of it. Had this unbelievably long and annoying name, but it was a quality index based on identity, and the Disney shareholders resoundingly chose to not get rid of it
because I feel like this hasn't been popular. I don't know if it's ever been popular. It's kind of been force-fed to society. And now the FCC is investigating Disney again for not abandoning DEI practices and saying that they're still using race-based hiring policies, and that's a problem. But with that, sure, the hiring I think is a separate issue than talking about the content decisions.
No, it is. It's they're very different aspects of the company as a whole.
So I just don't see this retreat from it like I think a lot of people would like to believe. I think
you also can't necessarily say that these themes in this show is failing because White Lotus is always in the news.
Right. And what I was going to say is what I think it really boils down to is just Gen Z, I mean, there's a million things you could say about them, but I think what you're really seeing in this new generation that's coming up into these studios and these writer rooms is just a creative crisis. People don't have original ideas. Like, for whatever reason it is, they're not making great new original art. When it is, it has to be parroted from whatever, the society culture battles
That's
are.
actually something that we talked about a little bit on Friday, which is back in the past, both actors and writers had real world experience that they could draw from. They went to war. They were in the military. They lived rough lives before they made it to the place that they are. And now basically all of your writers and directors go directly from school to college to film school to college, whatever. They go to grad school, whatever, if they're going to go beyond just directing and acting, and they've never actually lived a real life. I just watched this really funny...
It's credentialism is almost like proving that they are good artists when that's not a metric.
And it's funny because I was just there are places where not having real world experience benefits you. For instance, I was watching a John Boy video yesterday where they interviewed all these baseball players and asked them what their first job was. And half of them were I've never had a job. Really? My parents told me to focus on baseball. Yeah. So if you go to film school, if you've never worked a real job, if your real world experience is limited to areas of identity that you focused on in college, then your writing is going to reflect that. And that is not the real world experience of the average everyday person who's tuning in to watch these things. And then that's not even to get into coastal discussion of the thoughts and minds of those on the West Coast in rich coastal cities is very different from the thoughts of those in middle America. That's a whole different discussion. But the point is we're overwhelmed for content now. They need to fill it out, and a lot of the people making stuff aren't really drawing from great real world experience or even great real world creativity. Yeah. They're just making stories about things that are topical. And the problem with topical is it's boring by the next year because the news cycle is so quick that there's only a couple of topics that stand the test of time, let alone a couple of months.
I think it's a horrible decision to try to make your content timely, whether it's movies, shows, YouTube videos, music.
It's the worst aspects of most shows when they talk about stuff that's current year.
Yeah, they never this is a thing that rappers do all the time is they'll name drop a famous athlete, and it's well, now there's a song I was listening to a couple weeks ago, and they name drop Tom Brady, and I'm to the kids right now that are 2-3 years old that grow up to be
doesn't
football
make any
fans,
sense.
They're never going to have seen Tom Brady play a game. It's not going to make sense.
Music. I mean, I feel like musical lyrics are a little bit different. It's a little bit more not disposable, but it's just different. But I get the point.
There's songs with Joe Montana.
Use Michael Jordan. Use Michael Jordan. That's timeless. Yeah. Though everyone's glazing LeBron now.
He's the new thing.
Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.